Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I want to do an in-depth tutorial on the wet and wet method for watercolors. And so this is mainly going to be in real time so that you can really see what I'm doing and even follow along with me if you want to. So without further ado, let's get into the video. For this tutorial, I'm going to start off by showing you 3 different examples of different techniques for the wet and wet method. We're going to start off with a very simple one color wash from the darkest at the top, going lighter and lighter towards the bottom. Then for our second technique, we're going to just do the same thing with 2 colors. So we're going to create a gradient from one color slowly into our second color. And in the third technique, I'm going to go through how you can just add lots of different colors and really get them to nicely bleed into each other. And then for our fourth and final little piece, we're going to pull all of the techniques that we've learned in the tutorial so far and do an actual more finished painting. But before we go through our first technique, I want to just talk through the materials that I'm using for this tutorial. For the watercolors, I am using the Winsor & Newton Cotman watercolor set, but you guys can use any watercolors that you have. I am using the Arches cold pressed watercolor paper. I do find that cold pressed paper does work slightly better for the wet and wet technique. It doesn't dry as fast, which means that you have longer to actually work with the paint. Whereas with the hot pressed paper, I feel like it dries a little bit too quickly. I've also just got a jar of water and some tissue to blot off any excess paint that's on our brush, and I have got a couple of different paintbrushes of different sizes. You can get away with just using one, but it is always best to have a couple of different sizes. And that is all that I am using, so let's get straight into our first little technique. So I'm just getting some water on the brush. I'm using that size 6 round brush, and I'm just going to apply that to the whole of the paper. And what you're looking for is you want the paper to be nice and glistening, but you don't want puddles of water to form on your paper. And the tape is going to give us a really nice professional looking border to our work as well. Now that I've done that, let's go in and I'm just going to get some purple. You can use any colour that you want, and I'm just going to mix it onto my palette a little bit, just so that I can see the colour. I want to get it a bit more concentrated, and that's key. You don't want it to be really diluted. And now I'm just going to go at the top and just start at the top and bring my brush down, and then I'm going to just clean my brush and dry it off slightly, and then go back over that and start to drag and pull that further down. And you can see that we're starting to get that really nice gradient. And the key is you don't want to overdo this. And because the paper's nice and wet, you'll see that there's no harsh edges. It's really going to nice and softly bleed into each other. And that is what the purpose of the wet and wet technique is to help avoid any harsh edges. I'm just going to add a little more right at the top, just to make it nice and dark. Clean off my brush. So that is it for our first technique. You can see that we've got a really nice gradient from a darker purple right the way up into a lighter purple down here. And now for our second technique, let's do the same thing, but let's go in with 2 colours and gradient them 2 together. Just like before, we want to go and start off by wetting our paper completely with some clean water. And so for this one, I want to blend some pink into orange. So we're going to add pink at the top, and we're going to try and gradient it into some orange towards the bottom. So let's start off by getting some pink and putting it onto our palette. Remember, we don't want it to be too diluted. So I'm just picking up even more from my pan, mixing it into my palette. And now let's take that pink and let's work it through the top of the paper and bring it down towards the middle, and then just stop it there. You can pick up a bit more and add a bit more at the top if you want that to be slightly darker. But you can see we've stopped it halfway. Then clean off your brush, and you want to be careful because you do want to work whilst this is still wet. And let's take that orange and let's work that through the bottom, approaching the center, and stop at the center where it meets that pink. Now I want to get a little bit more of a concentrated orange, just work that through the bottom. I I do like to go horizontally. Just work it all the way into the middle. So as you can see, I'm bringing that orange up higher because at the moment we've got a bit of that white bar in the middle. And I'm going to get some more of the pink and bring the pink down further to meet that orange. And as you can see, we've got a nice soft gradient transitioning from our pink into our orange. Also, just before we move on to the third technique, I just want to let you guys know that if you are enjoying the real-time tutorials, then I have got over 200 real-time tutorials over on my Patreon, and each one is normally hours long. So there is hundreds of hours of content over on my Patreon for colour pencil, watercolour, charcoal. Those are the three main ones, but I also do have some pastel and marker tutorials on there as well. And so once you become a patron, you access all of the tutorials I have ever uploaded instantly, and you get access to new tutorials that I upload monthly, and I upload lots of new tutorials every single month. And so all of that is just for a small amount per month. I offer the sketch outlines and references and the materials list that I use so that you can really follow along with me. And I really do take you through all of my techniques, whether that is a whole portrait and a whole finished drawing or little studies where you can really build confidence with the techniques. So if you are interested in that, then I will leave a link at the top of the description so that you can see even more about what my Patreon has to offer. For our next one, what we're going to do is we're going to wet the whole of this section. Now, because this section is a little bit bigger, I like to switch over to a bigger brush. So I'm going to go in with some clean water. I did refill my water because it was getting a bit dirty. And I'm just going in and just pre-wetting the surface, making sure even the corners are nice and wet. There's not any puddles forming, but I can definitely see that it's got a nice glisten. You can see down here how nice and shiny it is, and that's how you know that your paper is nice and wet. So I'm first going to go in and I'm going to get some blue, and I want to have a nice concentration of this. I don't want it to be too diluted, and I'm just going to start to go and drop this onto my paper, and you can already see how much it's bleeding out. The more water you have down, the more it's going to bleed, so bear that in mind. And I'm just going to tap it on a few places on the painting. And now I'm going to go in with some green, and let's tap this in a few places as well. You can even splatter it on there. I'm scared to get it on the other example, so I'm going to be very careful. And when I splatter, I just tap on the back of my brush. Be very careful. You can add a bit more water to dilute the solution so that you have a bit of variety. Tap on the brush a little bit more. And I do like to leave some areas white, really just to add a bit of a nice contrast. And like I said, I do want to add a bit of yellow as well. And let's go and tap that into our painting as well. Again, I like to add some splatters. And now that we've practiced the wet and wet technique a little bit, we're going to go and do our final little painting, and we're going to do a really nice background using the wet and wet method, and then we're going to finish it off by adding in some tree silhouettes and a little bird silhouette as well. And we're going to do that once the paper is nice and dry, so I'll actually be showing you guys another technique, which is the wet on dry method. So I will pull up the little reference image here so you can see what I'll be following along to. I'll be loosely following along with this, but not like exactly. And as you guys know by now, the first step we're doing is we're going to wet the whole of the paper. And you can see that I left pretty much half of the page for this final study. So I'm really going in with my bigger brush and just wetting this whole area. Remember, focus on the borders and edges, make sure you're getting into all of the corners. I'm going to start off with our yellow colours. So I'm just going to pick up a bit of yellow, and you can see I've not like sketched anything out, I'm just going to go with it. And I'm going to apply this very much in the middle to get this cloudy look. Pick up a bit more, and I'm getting a bit more of a concentrated bit of yellow. And you can see that I'm just dotting this onto the paper. Now I'm going to go and get a little bit of the orange. So I'm going to take it from my palette. And now let's apply that to the paper as well. If you feel like you've got too much on your brush, you can go and blot it off onto your spare tissue paper. And when this dries, this is going to look really nice and bled out and will be a really nice base for our trees. Now I'm going to get some of the blue, and I blotted my brush so that I only have a little bit of the blue on my brush. And again, I'm just applying this wherever I can see a little bit of blue in the reference image. Also going to get a bit more purple and start to dot that in as well. Just tap that in wherever I feel like it. Now I really want to add a lot of bright pinks into this. I feel like the pinks is what really is going to make it. And we can see how nice the pink and orange look together in this little example that we did earlier. So I really want to include that colour. So let's go straight in with that. I'm going to apply it on top of some of the purple. All the way up onto the sky up here. You can mix it on top of other colours and they will all very softly bleed into each other. As long as your paper is still wet, they will mix together very nicely. Also looking at the clouds and looking at where the shadows are. For example, over here the shadows are like on top of the clouds, then there's a bit of highlight under it. There's a lot of pink over under these tree silhouettes. So I'm going to apply a bit more pink there. As you can see, I've not followed the reference exactly. And you'll notice when the paper is starting to dry out because you're going to get more harsh edges. It's not going to bleed out anymore. So once you notice that, stop applying paint, wait for it to dry, re-wet it, and then you can carry on. As you can see, I'm building up to my more intense colours. I do want to get in some more intense blues and just make that a bit more saturated. So I'm going to dig into my blue a bit more. And you can add the splatters again. I'm going to add some splatters, add a bit more dark blue. I want to go in and add a bit more orange. So I'm going over the top of those yellow areas in particular. Now I'm going to get some more pink and I want to create some little pink splatters. So load your brush up. With the pink you can do purple if you wanted. It doesn't have to be pink. I just like to create a few little splatters. I also want to add a little bit more purple to intensify some of the pink down here, just darken it up a little bit. Again, we do want to make sure that we've got some shadowed colours in. Add a little bit of purple right over here for the darker shadows. One trick that I do like to do if I do want to lighten up any areas is go in with a clean, fairly dry brush, and I just use that to lift up some of the watercolour, as you can see, and it helps to create really nice subtle highlights. So I'm just going to do that for the bottom of some of these clouds. And if you do it whilst the paper's still fairly wet, then it should still come out looking really nice and smooth and not harsh at all. Now that I've finished the background portion of this painting, I let it dry completely, and as you can see, here is the finished result before we go and add our branches and our bird. And it's really important that you let it dry completely before you do this next step. For this step, I'm going to use some smaller paintbrushes, just some round, more detailed brushes. Just use the smallest ones you can find. And I start off by going in and sketching out using a mixture of black and purple paint. I start sketching out the thickest branches for the tree. And as you can see, I'm not doing it fully straight. I'm adding in some waves in there just to make it a bit more natural looking. And it is thinnest right at the tip, and then it's thicker further down the trunk. So you can see that I'm just sketching in a few of them, and I really do give a nice edgy, jagged look to the trunks as well. And I'm just using my reference to help me figure out where the thickest branches are going to be. And then once I've got in the thicker branches, I start to add some little thinner branches coming off of the main branches that we've already sketched in. And I'm using that exact same mixture of paint, so just black and purple. I do like to add in purple just so it's not so flat looking, just to give it more vibrancy to it. And you can see that I'm using the tip of my paintbrush to get those really fine lines. And I'm again doing it in quite a sketchy way to get that nice natural look. And you want to have slightly thinner branches coming off the thicker branch, and then even thinner branches coming off of those branches that you've just added in. And you can see from the reference, I've also attached the reference in the description so that you guys can follow along to this if you want to. So I've provided the link for you to where I got that reference image from. And you can see on the reference there was quite a lot of tiny little branches. And I didn't include all of them, but I got the general gist in. And I think it's really nice not to just draw your branches straight, like straight up. You can see mine have a tilt to them, and this almost gives the idea that it's slightly windy and just gives more motion to the branches, I've found. It also looks really nice how you can see that wet and wet background peeping through the branches. I think it looks really pretty, and I really like how the background turned out. And you can see that pulling these techniques together, the wet and wet and the wet on dry, does work together to create a really beautiful final picture. I'm now going in and I'm starting to paint in the little bird, and this was nerve-wracking. I didn't do like a little sketch outline or anything with pencil first. I just thought, no, we'll go straight in, and I'll just go straight in with the black paint. And it turned out okay, but I was very nervous doing this, especially with black paint. So I just created that little silhouette and filled it in with that same black purple paint. And it's not perfect by any means. I would say it's a tiny bit big, but I was happy with how it turned out. And yeah, I really like it. I just went then and just finished up any bits of the branches that I felt like I needed to, and just perfected any little bits. Like for example, I'm just adding a thicker layer of paint to the bird. Now the last thing that I do like to do with my paintings is go in with some whitewash, and for this I'm using the Winsor & Newton permanent whitewash, and I'm just using that to create some little splatters. As you guys know by now, I love creating splatters on my watercolor paintings. It gives it a very nice twinkly look. So you can create bigger ones by splattering the paint, but also you can use something like a toothbrush or a water flat pen brush like I'm doing here, and you spray the whitewash onto the paper, and that gives you really tiny, like starry looking, like a shimmer. It's really pretty. So if you want some really tiny dots, then use this method to spray some shimmer onto your paper. I love combining these techniques. And then that is it for the painting. The most satisfying part for me is pulling off the tape at the end, and I love how it turned out. I think it looks really nice, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and you have learned something new about the wet and wet method, and you have built confidence with this technique. Here is a close-up of the finished painting. I hope you liked how yours turned out if you did follow along. And remember, if you liked the real-time tutorials that I did for this video, I know it's not something I usually do on my YouTube channel, so I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did and you want to see hundreds more real-time tutorials from me and learn all of my techniques, then they are available over on my Patreon, and you can get instant access to them as soon as you sign up for just $5 or $9 per month, depending on the tier you go for. So I'll leave a link at the top of the description so that you can check that out. Anyway guys, that's it for this tutorial. I really do hope that you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new around here, and even tick that bell icon so you do get notified on my future videos. But that is it from me, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye everybody.